What happens when a light-hearted daytime talk show suddenly feels less like a conversation and more like a coliseum, when applause turns sharp, smiles harden, and one young star realizes she's been pushed into a corner she never agreed to enter. That question hung in the air on a seemingly ordinary morning, the kind that usually fades into reruns and background noise. But this time, nothing faded. This time, the moment detonated live on television. Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe to Prime Talk right now, hit that like button, and drop a comment as you watch, because what unfolded next is the kind of moment people are still arguing about long after the cameras stop rolling. The studio lights on The View were warm, almost forgiving, bathing the iconic table in that familiar glow meant to feel inviting, safe, even comforting. The audience buzzed with casual excitement, clutching coffee cups, whispering to one another, phones tucked away but ready. Dove Cameron sat at the far end of the panel, posture poised, hands folded carefully in her lap. She wore a calm smile, the kind perfected through years of interviews, red carpets, and public scrutiny. On the surface, she looked relaxed. But beneath that smile, there was tension already settling in her chest, a quiet instinct whispering that this conversation might not go where she'd hoped. Across the table, Joy Behar leaned back in her chair, glasses perched low on her nose, expression sharp and unreadable. Joy had been doing this for decades. She knew how to guide a conversation, how to provoke, how to entertain. The audience trusted her for that very reason. But there was something in her tone that morning, an edge, a restlessness, as if she wasn't interested in small talk or polite answers. The producers had promised a thoughtful discussion about art, identity, and the pressures of fame. Dove had agreed to come on believing that promise. The conversation began innocently enough. Joy praised Dove's recent work, calling her talented with a half-smile that suggested a compliment, but not a surrender. Dove thanked her, voice soft but confident, eyes scanning the table as the other hosts nodded along. For a brief moment, it felt like smooth sailing. The audience laughed at a light joke. Applause rippled gently through the room. But then Joy leaned forward. "So," Joy said, tilting her head, "you talk a lot about being authentic, about speaking your truth. Don't you think sometimes celebrities confuse honesty with attention-seeking?" The question landed heavier than expected. The audience murmured. Dove's smile froze for half a second, just long enough for cameras to catch it. She inhaled slowly, choosing her words with care. "I think authenticity looks different for everyone," she replied. "For me, it's about being honest without hurting people." Joy raised an eyebrow. "But isn't going public with every feeling kind of performative?" The temperature in the room shifted. You could feel it. Dove adjusted in her seat, crossing and uncrossing her ankles. Inside, a familiar mix of frustration and restraint bubbled up. She'd been asked versions of this question before, always framed as curiosity, always carrying an undertone of judgment. Still, she answered calmly, "I don't think sharing personal experiences is a performance. I think it can help people feel less alone." A few claps broke out. Others stayed silent. Joy didn't smile. "That sounds nice," Joy said, her voice sweet but pointed. "But some people would say you're using vulnerability as a shield from criticism." Now the arena walls were visible. The air felt tighter, sharper. Dove's jaw set, but her voice remained steady. "I don't think vulnerability should be punished," she said, "especially when it comes from a place of growth." Joy let out a small laugh, not loud, not warm. Or maybe it's just branding. The audience gasped softly. One of the co-hosts shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable, opening her mouth as if to intervene, then closing it again. Cameras zoomed in on Dove's face. The smile was gone now. In its place was something raw, something honest that couldn't be rehearsed. "I'm not a brand sitting here," Dove said quietly. "I'm a person." The room went still. Even the applause light seemed unsure of what to do. Joy leaned back, folding her arms. "Everyone on this show is a person," she replied. "But when you step into the spotlight, you invite scrutiny. You don't get to control how people interpret you." Dove swallowed. Her hands tightened together under the table. In her mind, thoughts raced, not angry, but wounded. She'd come to speak about her work, her journey, her art. Instead, she felt dissected, framed as an exhibit rather than a guest. "Scrutiny is one thing," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "Being dismissed is another." The audience reacted in waves, some clapping, some murmuring, some exchanging looks of disbelief. The tension was no longer subtle. It was thick, undeniable, crackling between the two women like a live wire. Joy's expression hardened. "Well," Joy said, "maybe if you didn't take everything so personally." Dove straightened. Her eyes met Joy's directly now. "It is personal," she said. "You're talking about my life." Silence slammed into the studio. A producer off-camera shifted. One of the hosts tried to pivot the conversation, mentioning a new project, a lighter note. But it was too late. The arena had already been built, and both women were standing in the center of it. Dove exhaled, a long, shaky breath. For the first time, she looked out at the audience, not for approval, but for grounding. And in that moment, it became clear, this wasn't just an interview anymore. This was a line being crossed, live, with nowhere to hide. The silence didn't last long, but it felt endless. You could hear it in the studio, the faint hum of the lights, the soft shuffle of shoes against the floor, a nervous cough from somewhere in the audience. The cameras kept rolling, red lights blinking like unblinking eyes, capturing every breath, every twitch of emotion. Dove Cameron sat upright, shoulders squared now, no longer trying to soften herself for the room. Something inside her had shifted. The instinct to please had given way to the need to protect herself. Joy Behar was the first to break the quiet. She let out a sigh, the kind that sounded less like reflection and more like impatience. "I'm just saying," she began, waving a hand dismissively. "This generation is very sensitive. Everything becomes a personal battle." A ripple of reaction moved through the audience, some nods, some frowns. Dove's lips parted slightly, then pressed together again. She could feel her heart pounding, not with fear, but with a sharp clarity. "Respect isn't sensitivity," she said, her voice low but firm. "It's a baseline." Joy tilted her head, studying Dove as if she were a puzzle refusing to fit. "Respect goes both ways," she replied. "You come on a show like this, you should expect tough questions." Dove nodded once. "I do expect tough questions," she said. "I don't expect to be talked down to." The co-hosts shifted again. One leaned forward, attempting to mediate. "I think what Joy means is," she started, but Joy cut her off with a raised hand. "No, let me finish," Joy said sharply. The audience murmured. "I'm tired of celebrities acting like any disagreement is an attack. You're successful, you're influential. You can handle a little pushback." The words landed like stones. Dove felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she refused to blink it away on camera. Her voice, when she spoke, carried a tremor that made the room lean in. "Pushback isn't the issue," she said. "Being reduced to a stereotype is." Joy laughed again, louder this time. "A stereotype? Come on." "Yes," Dove replied, now unmistakably emotional. "The idea that if someone speaks openly about their experiences, they are performing. That if they set boundaries, they are weak. That's a stereotype, and it's exhausting." Applause broke out, this time stronger, less hesitant. Joy glanced toward the audience, her jaw tightening. She hadn't expected the crowd to lean this way. Her voice sharpened in response. "You're on television," she snapped. "Everything here is performance." Dove's hands trembled openly now. She placed them flat on the table, grounding herself. "Then maybe that's the problem," she said. "If everything has to be an arena, no one gets to be human." That word, arena, hung heavy in the air. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The studio felt exactly like one now, bright lights, divided sides, a crowd waiting to see who would flinch first. One of the co-hosts attempted again to steer the conversation away, suggesting a commercial break. A producer's voice whispered urgently through an earpiece. But Joy pressed on, fueled by momentum and something else, defiance. "So what?" Joy said, leaning forward, elbows on the table. "You want everyone to tiptoe around your feelings." Dove shook her head slowly. "I want basic dignity." A hush fell over the room. The audience clapped again, louder still, and this time Joy didn't hide her irritation. She glanced toward the applause sign, then back at Dove. "You're getting plenty of dignity," she said. "What you're not getting is agreement." Dove let out a shaky laugh, disbelief creeping into her expression. "This isn't about agreement," she said. "It's about the way you're speaking to me." Joy opened her mouth to respond, but one of the co-hosts finally interjected, voice tight. "Okay, let's all take a breath." Too late. The damage was done. Dove's eyes glistened now, no longer able, or willing, to hide the hurt. She looked down at the table for a moment, gathering herself, then back up at Joy. When she spoke again, her voice cracked just enough to make the moment irreversible. I came here to have a conversation, she said. Not to defend my right to exist the way I am. The audience erupted, applause mixed with gasps, a few standing up instinctively. Social media teams backstage were already scrambling, fingers flying across keyboards, sensing the clip that would soon dominate timelines. Joy leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, expression unreadable but tense. Well, Joy said coolly, maybe this isn't the right show for you. The words sliced through the noise. Even the audience went quiet, shocked by the bluntness of it. Dove stared at Joy, eyes wide, not angry now, but stunned. For a split second, she seemed frozen, as if weighing her options. Stay and endure, or leave and reclaim herself. She inhaled deeply. The room waited. I think you might be right, Dove said softly. A collective gasp swept through the studio. One of the co-hosts whispered, "Oh my God." Joy's eyes flickered, surprise, maybe even regret, but she didn't speak. Dove pushed her chair back slowly. The scrape of metal against the floor echoed louder than any applause. I'm done being talked over, Dove said, standing now, voice steadier than anyone expected. I'm done being diminished for entertainment. The audience stood almost as one, clapping, shouting, some calling out her name. Cameras scrambled to adjust, producers shouting directions. Joy sat frozen, lips pressed into a thin line, the arena she'd helped create now roaring beyond her control. And as Dove stepped away from the table, heart pounding, emotions spilling free at last, one truth became undeniable. This was no longer just a heated exchange. This was the beginning of a moment that would not stay contained within the studio walls. Dove Cameron didn't rush off the set. That was the first thing everyone noticed. She moved with deliberate calm, every step measured, as if she refused to let the chaos behind her dictate the way she carried herself forward. But inside, everything was spinning. Her ears rang with overlapping sounds, applause, shocked whispers, producers calling out cues, the hollow echo of her own words replaying in her head. Each step away from the table felt heavier than the last, like she was walking through water. Behind her, the set of the view had fractured into confusion. One co-host stood halfway out of her chair, torn between following Dove and staying in her seat. Another stared straight ahead, hands clasped, clearly aware that history had just been made on live television. The director's voice crackled urgently through headsets, asking whether to cut to commercial, whether to stay wide, whether to chase Dove with a camera. No one had a clean answer. Joy Behar remained seated, her posture stiff, eyes tracking Dove as she moved toward the edge of the stage. For the first time all morning, Joy looked unsure. The confidence that usually wrapped her words like armor had slipped, replaced by a flicker of something dangerously close to self-awareness. She cleared her throat, glancing toward the audience, then toward the other hosts. Well, Joy said, forcing a lightness that didn't land, that escalated quickly. The audience didn't laugh. Not a single chuckle. Instead, a low murmur filled the studio, disapproval, confusion, sympathy, all colliding at once. The silence that followed was louder than anything else. Backstage, Dove paused just beyond the camera's reach. Her hands were shaking now, no longer hidden by the table or the studio framing. A producer approached her cautiously, voice gentle. Are you okay? He asked. Dove nodded, though tears were finally slipping free. I can't do that, she said quietly. I won't. Another staff member offered her water. Someone else suggested a quiet room. Dove took a breath, pressing the heel of her hand against her chest, grounding herself. She wasn't crying because she'd lost. She was crying because she'd chosen herself on live television, and that choice came with a cost. On set, the hosts attempted to regain control. One of them addressed the audience directly, voice measured, professional. We're going to take a short break, she said. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. But the audience wasn't listening anymore. They were already pulling out their phones, thumbs moving fast, capturing clips, typing reactions, sending messages that would ripple across the internet within minutes. The moment had escaped the studio. It belonged to the public now. When the show returned from commercial, Dove's chair sat empty at the table. The absence was louder than her presence had been. Joy stared at the space for a brief moment before speaking again. Well, she said, exhaling, this is what happens when emotions run high. One of the co-hosts finally pushed back, her voice calm but firm. Joy, I think we need to acknowledge that this got personal. Joy bristled. Television is personal, she replied. People don't tune in for polite agreement. But they also don't tune in to watch someone get cornered, the co-host said, earning a wave of applause from the audience. Joy's lips pressed together. She nodded once, stiffly. Point taken, she said, though the words sounded more obligatory than sincere. Meanwhile, Dove sat alone in a quiet hallway, phone buzzing nonstop in her lap. She hadn't checked it yet. She already knew what was happening out there. Clips were being shared. Headlines were being drafted. Narratives were being chosen without her consent. She closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the wall. For years, she had navigated fame by bending, by softening her edges, by explaining herself again and again until she was exhausted. In that moment, walking off the set hadn't felt dramatic. It had felt necessary. Survival, not spectacle. Her publicist finally arrived, breathless. "We need to talk," she said gently. "This is blowing up." Dove opened her eyes. "I figured," she replied. Her voice was tired, but there was steel beneath it now. "I meant what I said." "I know," her publicist said. And people saw that. On social media, the reaction was already splitting into camps. One side hailed Dove as brave, praising her for standing up to what they called a dismissive and hostile tone. Clips of her saying, "I want basic dignity," looped endlessly, paired with captions about boundaries and respect. Others accused her of being overly emotional, of walking away instead of engaging, of proving Joy's point. Hashtags trended. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds of their own. Inside the studio, Joy tried to laugh off the tension as the show wrapped, but it didn't stick. The audience applause at the end was thinner, restrained. The usual energy was gone, replaced by a collective awareness that something had gone wrong, and that no amount of spin could fully erase it. As Dove finally stood to leave the building, she paused near the exit, sunlight spilling in through the glass doors. For a moment, she hesitated, hand hovering over the handle. Walking out meant stepping into a storm of opinions, headlines, and judgment. Staying silent would have been easier. Staying seated would have been safer. But she pushed the door open anyway. Outside, cameras were already waiting. Voices called her name. Questions flew. Dove kept walking, eyes forward, shoulders back. She didn't owe anyone an explanation in that moment. She'd already given her truth on live television. And as the doors closed behind her, sealing off the studio and its arena, one thing became clear. This confrontation wasn't ending here. It was only gaining momentum, echoing far beyond the walls of the View, into a culture already divided over who gets to speak, who gets to challenge power, and who gets labeled too much for refusing to stay quiet. By the time the sun dipped lower over New York, the moment had already hardened into history. Clips from the show ricocheted across the internet, trimmed to 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, each version telling a slightly different story, each angle sharpening the divide. One frame froze Dove Cameron mid-sentence, eyes bright with conviction. Another caught Joy Behar leaning back, arms crossed, lips pressed thin. Together, they became symbols, not people, flattened into opposing sides of a cultural argument that had been simmering for years. Newsrooms moved fast. Push alerts lit up phones with headlines that escalated the drama. Dove Cameron walks off the View after heated exchange. Joy Behar sparks backlash following on-air clash. Daytime TV turns combative as guest exits mid-interview. The language was urgent, breathless, feeding the algorithm's appetite. By nightfall, cable panels debated what it all meant: respect versus resilience, generational divides, the cost of vulnerability in public spaces. Everyone had an opinion. Few paused to consider the people behind the clips. In the hours after the show, Dove stayed quiet. No tweet, no statement, just distance. She spent the evening with a small circle of people who knew her without a spotlight, the kind of presence that doesn't ask you to perform. Still, the noise found its way in. Her phone buzzed with messages, some supportive, some cruel, many from strangers who felt entitled to her emotions. She read a few, then put the phone face down. The decision to walk away had been made in a heartbeat, but living with it would take longer. Across town, Joy Behar faced a different kind of reckoning. The backlash was swift and loud. Critics accused her of turning a conversation into combat, of dismissing a guest's humanity for the sake of a sharper moment. Supporters defended her, praising her refusal to coddle celebrity culture, arguing that disagreement wasn't abuse. Joy addressed it briefly the next day, measured and practiced. She said television thrives on debate. She said emotions ran high. She said she wished the conversation had gone differently. It was enough for some. Not enough for others. The audience reaction lingered like an after-image. People who had been in the studio posted their own accounts. How the air felt heavier. How the applause had split down invisible lines. How the silence after Dove stood up felt like a collective intake of breath. A few described the moment as uncomfortable. Others called it electric. All agreed on one thing: it didn't feel scripted. It felt real. As days passed, the narrative widened. Think pieces dissected tone and power. Psychologists weighed in on boundaries and public shaming. Media critics questioned whether confrontation had become a shortcut to relevance, whether the arena had replaced the table. Clips from past interviews resurfaced, stitched together to suggest patterns, to prove points. The internet did what it always does, found evidence for every side. Dove eventually spoke, but not with anger. In a short message, she wrote about choosing dignity, about the difference between dialogue and dismissal, about knowing when to step away. She didn't name names. She didn't escalate. That restraint surprised people. It also deepened the conversation. Suddenly, it wasn't just about a walk-off. It was about permission to say this isn't okay, even when cameras are rolling. Meanwhile, the view continued. It always does. The table was reset. New guests came through. Applause rose and fell on cue. But the empty chair from that day remained a ghost in the footage, a reminder that live television still carries risk, that not every moment can be controlled once the lights turn on. Producers adjusted segments. Hosts softened transitions. The arena didn't disappear, but the walls felt more visible. For viewers at home, the aftermath became personal. Comment sections filled with stories, times people felt talked over, cornered, dismissed. Others shared moments when they believed walking away was a mistake, when staying and fighting would have meant more. The debate wasn't tidy. It was raw. And maybe that was the point. The moment cracked something open, forcing a conversation that couldn't be reduced to a single clip. In the end, no one won. There were no knockouts, no neat resolutions. Just consequences, ripples moving outward. A young star choosing herself. A veteran host confronting the limits of provocation. An audience reminded that empathy isn't weakness, and disagreement doesn't require dehumanization. The arena quieted, but the echo remained. And now, the conversation lands here, with you. Was Dove right to walk away, or should she have stayed and pushed back harder? Did Joy cross a line, or was she doing exactly what live television demands? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear where you stand. And if you're drawn to the moments that make culture pause, clash, and reconsider itself, make sure you subscribe to Prime Talk. Like this video, share it with someone who's still debating what happened, and stay with us for more explosive, cinematic stories that don't look away when the tension rises.